The present simple. First of all, looking at some sentence structures. Subject, verb, preposition, phrase. Example: I live in North Swindon. I work for a language school. Subject, verb, object. I teach English. I ride a bicycle. Subject, verb, object, preposition, phrase. I start work at 8:30. I ride my bicycle on the cycle path. One of the main uses of the present simple is to talk about frequency. Here are the adverbs of frequency: never, hardly ever or rarely, sometimes, normally, usually, often, always. Sentence structure: subject, adverb, verb, object, preposition, phrase. I normally eat dinner at 7 o'clock. Subject, adverb, verb, preposition, phrase, preposition, phrase. I often go to the cinema on Fridays. This shows how we can add preposition phrases at the end of sentences to give more information. Another way to talk about frequency is to use frequency expressions. Examples: once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, a day, a week, a month, a year, once a week, 3 times a day. Or every, morning, afternoon, evening, day, week, month, year. Every morning, every year. Subject, verb, object, frequency expression. I meet my friends twice a week. Subject, verb, preposition, phrase, frequency expression. I go to the hairdressers every 2 months. Here is a recap of the 4 sentence structures we looked at. A. Subject, adverb, verb, object, preposition, phrase. B. Subject, adverb, verb, preposition, phrase. C. Subject, verb, object, preposition, phrase, frequency expression. D. Subject, verb, preposition, phrase, frequency expression. In this activity, we will practice putting the words into the correct order. Number 1. Get, I, food, sometimes takeaway. I sometimes get takeaway food. This is an example of sentence structure A with no preposition phrase. Number 2. Clothes, internet, buy, I, the, never, on. I never buy clothes on the internet. This is also an example of sentence structure A, this time with a preposition phrase. 3. Dinner, at, cook, I, night, 7 o'clock, every. I cook dinner at 7 o'clock every night. This is an example of sentence structure C. Number 4. The, TV, morning, watch, on, the, I, news, often, in. I often watch the news on TV in the morning. Sentence structure A with 2 preposition phrases. 5. Home, I, at, night, study, every, English. I study English at home every night. Example of structure C. Number 6. Twice, I, housework, week, do, the. I do the housework twice a week. Sentence structure C again with no preposition phrase. 7. In, on, often, the, Sundays, I, park, go, walk, for. I often go for a walk in the park on Sundays. This is structure B with 3 preposition phrases. Asking questions about frequency using the present simple, question word, auxiliary verb do or does, subject, verb, object or preposition phrase. The question word for frequency is how often. How often do you get takeaway food? So for the sentence, I sometimes get takeaway food, the question is, how often do you get takeaway food? Number 2, I never buy clothes on the internet. How often do you buy clothes on the internet? Number 3, I cook dinner at 7 o'clock every night. How often do you cook dinner? Number 4, I often watch the news on TV in the morning. How often do you watch the news on TV? 5. I study English at home every night. How often do you study English at home? I do the housework twice a week. How often do you do the housework? I often go for a walk in the park on Sundays. How often do you go for a walk in the park? The important thing is to group the words how often do you together into one unit. How often do you? How often do you get takeaway food? So practice, how often do you? Looking at the question in the third person he/she form, we need to change the auxiliary verb from do to does. How often does he or she get takeaway food? Number 2, how often do you buy clothes on the internet? How often does he buy clothes on the internet? How often do you cook dinner? How often does she cook dinner? How often do you watch the news on TV? How often does he watch the news on TV? How often do you study English at home? How often does she study English at home? How often do you do the housework? How often does he do the housework? How often do you go for a walk in the park? How often does she go for a walk in the park? Again, here important to group the words together. How often does he? How often does she? How often does he? How often does she? Changing positive sentences from the first person I form to the third person he/she form. I sometimes get takeaway food. He or she sometimes gets takeaway food. So notice that we need to put the S onto the verb there. I never buy clothes on the internet. He never buys clothes on the internet. I cook dinner at 7 o'clock every night. She cooks dinner at 7 o'clock every night. I often watch the news on TV in the morning. He often watches the news on TV in the morning. Notice the pronunciation there of watches. I study English at home every night. She studies English at home every night. I do the housework twice a week. He does the housework twice a week. Do changing to does in the third person. I often go for a walk in the park on Sundays. She often goes for a walk in the park on Sundays. Go changing to goes in the third person. So apart from talking about frequency, the present simple is also used to give information, permanent situations, facts. Example, I live in North Swindon. I work for a language school. I teach English. I have one daughter. I have 2 brothers. I speak English and Spanish. What are the questions that we need to get this information? I live in North Swindon. Question: where do you live? I work for a language school. Where do you work? I teach English. What do you do? I have one daughter. How many children do you have? I have 2 brothers. How many brothers and sisters do you have? I speak English and Spanish. What languages do you speak? A revision of the word order for questions. Question word, auxiliary verb do or does in the present simple, subject verb. Where do you live? Changing questions from the second person you to the third person he or she. Where do you live? Where does he or she live? Do changing to does, you changing to he or she. Where do you work? Where does he work? What do you do? What does she do? How many children do you have? How many children does he have? How many brothers and sisters do you have? How many brothers and sisters does she have? What languages do you speak? What languages does he speak? Changing positive sentences from the first person I to the third person he or she. I live in North Swindon. He or she lives in North Swindon. Again, it's putting the S onto the verb in the third person. I work for a language school. He works for a language school. I teach English. She teaches English. Notice pronunciation there, teach, teaches. I have one daughter. She has one daughter. Have changes to has in the third person. I have 2 brothers. He has 2 brothers. I speak English and Spanish. She speaks English and Spanish. Finally, the present simple negative form. For the subjects I, you, we, they form the negative with do not, contracted to don't, plus the verb in the infinitive form. He, she, or it form the negative with does not, or contracted form doesn't, plus verb in the infinitive form. I live in North Swindon. I don't live in North Swindon. We often watch the news on TV in the morning. We don't often watch the news on TV in the morning. You work for a language school. You don't work for a language school. They teach English. They don't teach English. He has one daughter. He doesn't have one daughter. She has 2 brothers. She doesn't have 2 brothers. He speaks English and Spanish. He doesn't speak English and Spanish. She studies English at home every night. She doesn't study English at home every night.